It makes for good TV.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Castro. I'm Vice President of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to this morning's event, Unboxing the Piracy Threat of Streaming Media Boxes. For those of you that don't know, ITIF, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank. We've been working on technology policy issues for quite a while, especially looking at copyright issues and how we can do more to protect the creative industry while balancing innovation. Just before we begin, just one logistical note. The event is being recorded. It will be posted on our website at a later date, but so everyone knows, anything said here is going to be recorded. To kind of set the stage, I think it's interesting when you kind of reflect on the history of digital piracy and how it's changed with the evolution of technology. So I think the kind of first mainstream conversations we had around digital piracy was kind of the 80s and 90s with the campaigns about don't copy that floppy, and people finally had this technology at their hands, personal computers, really accessible digital media, where they could make copies of different types of media and software. And then you kind of moved into the internet era, obviously the rise of peer-to-peer file sharing networks, Napster, moving past that. It was BitTorrent and these kind of stronger peer-to-peer clients that were enabled. And then you moved to the cloud. So you had all this online, the BitLockers, online storage, online streaming media. And now we're moving into the era of the Internet of Things. And once again, piracy is adapting to this, and now we have streaming media boxes. I think it's important when we kind of reflect on that, and we reflect kind of how government and industry has responded to each of these turns, we can kind of see the challenges here that are inherent. In pretty much all of these cases, the technology in question was, of course, a general purpose technology that we want to enable, that we want to encourage, but at the same time can have a very negative impact on different industries if we don't have good policy in place and if government and industry aren't working hand in hand to address the types of challenges that we see. So as I think we want to do today is have a conversation about this new change that we're seeing, the new rise of the streaming media boxes, what this means for consumers, what this means for industry, and how government and industry can work together to address these issues, and how they can work with consumers as well to ensure that they have the best access to digital media and entertainment and innovation. So the goal of this panel is to dig into these issues, discuss the challenges associated with piracy from streaming media boxes, its impact on the creative industry, and steps that we can take to protect lawful businesses. I'm really excited about the great panel of experts that we have with us today. Starting here on my left is Tom Galvin, Executive Director of the Digital Citizens Alliance. To his right is Neil Fried, Senior Vice President at the Motion Picture Association of America. Wendy Feinerman, who's an independent film and TV producer. She was also the first solo female producer in the history of the Academy to have received an Oscar for Best Picture. Kevin Madigan, Assistant Director for the Center for the Protection of Intellectual Property, and Curtis Minder, who's the CEO and co-founder of GroupSense, a cybersecurity firm in Arlington. So thanks to all of you for joining us here today. So I know I've kind of just started off by talking about streaming media boxes. Neil, you've obviously done a lot of work on this. Can you kind of help set the stage here and show us one of these boxes and kind of walk us through what exactly this technology is and how it's being used?
Sure. I do like to start these presentations with the positive. The internet is a tremendous thing. It allows us to communicate, to create. It enables commerce. And the creative community embraces the internet. There is a huge legitimate marketplace for online access to content. The excuse used to be, oh, well, I have to steal it, I can't find it online. Never really a great reason for theft, but also just not true. There's now more than 140 lawful online sources for accessing content, movies and TV programs, to the point where in 2016 alone, 8 billion films accessed lawfully online, 100 billion television episodes accessed online. So there is an enormous legitimate marketplace online to access content legitimately. So that's the baseline. Now, like all tools, some that are used for good are also used for bad, and we're seeing technology also being used for theft. And one of the latest trends is streaming devices, apps and devices. And essentially what they are, and we will unbox the box, as the title suggests, this is what we're talking about. It's essentially an Android device. It's a CPU. that you can plug right into your television. And that's not the problem. I mean, it's a computer, right? It's a little mini computer, but it's an Android platform. It's got an Android desktop loaded onto it. And then there are apps. There's an environment called Kodi. It's essentially a media center software, open source. Again, nothing necessarily unlawful about that. But what happens is people are building apps specifically designed for piracy to use these. And to give you a sense of the problem, Sandvine reports that we're now looking at about 6.5 million North American households with these devices that have been preloaded with piracy apps specifically configured to access pirate content. So what does that look like? It's a video. We always know that internet access is never perfect on the Hill. So
Before you begin, just anyone that's over here, if you can't see, we do have plenty of open seats here. I meant to announce this at the beginning, but if you want to move, you're welcome to move so you can see the demo.
So we'll sort of pause just for one moment so I can give you a sense of what you're about to see. So what this is essentially one of these devices that are probably brought in from China and that have been preloaded first with the Android desktop, which is what you're seeing here. Notice that even already this Android desktop has been essentially customized for piracy. If you look at the upper left, online video, what do you see? Iron Man. That is not an authorized image. This is someone already, even before you've gotten to launch this thing, has already preloaded this customized for piracy. What you're going to see in a moment is from here we'll go to the Kodi environment, and the first thing you're going to see is an XL app. This is a piracy app that's been preloaded. It's a subscription app where you're essentially paying $20 a month to access curated pirated content. And let's go ahead and start, and I may pause you as we go. So you launch the Android desktop. Here's XL on the left. You see all these apps, right? And there can be legitimate apps on Kodi, but this is one specifically designed for piracy. You see all your choices. These are categories of essentially just pirated content. The first thing you're going to see is essentially live US content that's being streamed to this device through this app. You'll see broadcast networks. These are New York feeds. This is unauthorized, available throughout the globe. Yes, it's broadcast content, but there are particular markets. Here you have the Olympics essentially being pirated. These streams are being intercepted. Turn the volume down a little bit. I'll let you pause it for one moment and see if you can. Okay. So essentially the Olympics, this is the New York feed. As you may or may not know, right, the broadcast feeds are in regions. They're in parts of the country. Advertising is tailored to them. And that feed for that affiliate is supposed to be in a particular part of the country. So that the advertising is related and the advertisers are being compensated for the programming in that part of the country. This is being sent all across the globe to anybody who wants to watch it. So the advertising is not right and is being essentially stolen. And this may be coming from, many people are getting this from a pay TV service. Again, so already you have sort of curated live streams of content right to a device. Completely illegitimate. But it looks real. Why don't we pick that up? Go ahead. So that's, all live streams of broadcast programming. It's not just broadcast programming. You look through the different selections in your handy categorization. You can get sports programming. So here's a pay TV sports network. This is not even available free over the air. This would be through cable or satellite. But here you have American Ninja Warrior. Again, this is live. This is actually being aired at the time. It's as if you turned your TV to that network channel. But this is a completely pirated operation through a device like this. Next, we have basic cable. Again, this is content that ordinarily would be licensed to a distributor, but we have an operation getting a feed somewhere, catering it themselves through a paid piracy service, and sending it to your TV. Just plugged in.
What are we going to do?
Housewives of Atlanta. We look elsewhere. What else do we have? Well, we can keep looking, and you've got a minute to go to the next one. Keep going. UK movies. So now these are, again, networks. This is not on demand. This is the live streaming of a movie network. This is Sky. And we have Suicide Squad, which happens to be airing at that moment on a network. The consumer has not paid appropriately for the service. They've paid probably one time and a subscription fee for this catered piracy service. And in honor of our guest, we have a few other things. We have some other box office recommendations, current films, right? And you'll scroll through and see, all right, what movie do I want to watch today? And you'll see these are all current popular films. Again, the difference here is, right, they've created an interface to make this look authentic. And one of the films you might find on these sorts of services, you type in a nice little search bar, and you get The Devil Wears Prada. And the quality is, I mean, this is streamed to you in a pretty high quality. Again, these are subscription services. They're taking monthly fees from consumers and curating their own networks where they get the feed and they manage it. And well, it'll sort of, so those are the subscription services. This next one is called Neptune Rising. Some of these are not subscription services. Essentially, it's a free app. You just pay for the device. It could be a one-time fee, $100, $300, depends on the device. And what now they do is they just comb the internet. They essentially index what's already available on cyber lockers, and you do a search. You figure out what it is you want to watch. Again, they do some categorization, or you can type in through a text search. Sorry, we're picking on you today.
Really picking on my bottom line.
And now what it's doing is it's going to scour the internet. You see, it's got all the ads. They pulled the ads, maybe from IMDb, the art, and now it's just looking for somewhere on the internet. It's probably a torrent file somewhere on a cyber locker, but they're automating it for you. Now they tell you all the places you can find it. You scroll down for one of them, you click, and now you've got Forrest Gump. So the question, of course, is, what are we doing about this? This is bad, right? I mean, we have a legitimate, as I talked about, marketplace that everybody wants, where everyone can access content lawfully online. It's good for the audiences, it's good for the creators, and it's obviously good for the companies that provide that to you. So we have a large coalition of people that are being harmed by this, not just the audiences, but us, of course.
Yep.
And so the first thing we're doing is we're talking to law enforcement. We've made... So the first thing we've done is reached out to law enforcement. We have a large coalition of studios, large and independent, creative community, broadcasters, cable operators, satellite operators, online providers, Netflix, Amazon, right? There are legitimate businesses that are really being harmed here. And we've gone to DOJ and said, look, this is criminal behavior. We do a little of our own forensic work, and we made some referrals. And so DOJ is looking at a variety of these potential candidates for criminal action. And one thing we would ask is that if you have the opportunity, please encourage law enforcement. They've got to do their due diligence. This is not a quick process, right? They've got to do their work. But if we can show support to DOJ and law enforcement to go after these bad actors, this is theft. This is a crime, and it needs to stop. It's hurting lots of economic activity, and it ultimately hurts audiences because it's hurting the creators who are not being compensated for their work. So that's one thing. We also bring some civil actions. Again, a lot of people being harmed here. There's a large coalition. It's called the Alliance for Creativity and Entertainment. It's the studios, it's Netflix, it's Amazon, and you may have heard we've already brought a couple of suits. One, it's a device sort of like this called Tickbox. We've received a preliminary injunction, and what these guys are doing is clearly, wink, wink, nod, nod, buy my device, use my apps, and never pay for cable again, never pay for Netflix again. And they're clearly marketing these things as a piracy service. They claim, oh, it's just a piece of technology, we can't control what the consumer does with it. But if you look at all their marketing, it's pretty clear, get movies in the theater and never pay for them. So again, that started well. We've already gotten a preliminary injunction there. There's another one called Dragon Box, very similar, that's working its way through the courts. So that's something else we're doing. What else we could use is, again, some help with appropriations. We're in the appropriation season. Make sure that law enforcement is funded to do these things. It would be great to nudge them, give them, I mean, they have a lot they have to do, but it always helps, and they tell us this themselves. If the report language in the appropriations bills say, please focus on this problem, it is a growing problem, there are 2 million people in the United States making a living in this industry that you are hurting. And that's, in a nutshell, I think, sort of the table setting. I don't know if you want to add.
Great, yeah. So maybe first, Wendy, you can kind of give a little bit of a reaction since we just saw some of your movies up here. I mean, I think, some people in the audience might, you see this and you say, oh, $20 a month, great deal. Like, where can I get one of these? And I'm sure you're sitting there with a very different thought. Give us your reaction to seeing this.
Well, first of all, I'll say this. First, I'll say this. Quite perturbed. I mean, it's like you sit there and you realize, especially after having been here for 2 days now, talking to a lot of you, and you kind of talk through, and then you really kind of, at a certain point, like right now, it goes, wow. I mean, and you talk about how many people work on a movie or how long it takes a movie to get made. And, when I really see all this, I see a lot of people's work that's not acknowledged, both physically, economically, just in terms of behavior of life, and how we live next door to one another and treat people and respect them. And, there's just a real huge disregard for what people think that the work and the hard work and the effort that's gone into it. I mean, you all live in Washington area. You've all seen those white trucks that show up, and all those people who are employed, and we all, including myself, get very uncomfortable and nasty about it because they usually inconvenience our life, yet they will reward us later with entertainment. But what people don't realize is before that even happened, there's usually years of work that got us to the point of your inconvenience and ultimately to your pleasure, and now to your pleasure that you're not paying for. So to take you through a little bit of the creative process is one of the things that when I was asked to come down and speak here today, I really thought about hard was there will always be certain kinds of entertainment. There will always be entertainment, and this is not to go off topic, but there will always be certain kind of entertainment. There will always be the war movies, there will always be the classic movies, but the movies that really move people happen to be the movies that I'm attracted to, the movies that, make one think, that make one socially conscious, that social conscience. The movies that, whether they be a movie called Stepmom that I made years ago that was about being a step-parent or being a step-kid or whatever, but they were movies that you look at everybody's every day of life and you go, God, I can relate to that, and it makes you not feel so alone in this huge universe. Now, this may sound like, whatever, but it really, people take comfort in this. And, the other night when Guillermo del Toro stood up and gave his speech, and it was actually a speech that, and it's not a speech, it's a feeling that we share, is one of the things that I look for in all my films, whether it be Forrest Gump, or The Devil Wears Prada, or P.S. I Love You, or Stepmom, or Fairy Tale. I always think about first loves, and we all have a first love. Whatever your whatever your sexual orientation is, whatever your ethnicity is, we all have a first love. And for the most part, none of us are with that first love. And movies about first love make people feel, they make people realize that their heart and their emotion and they don't feel different. They feel like even if they're not with their first love and their first love broke their heart, well, at least they feel a little better because probably that person on the screen heart was broken too. And these are just ordinary great feelings that, if you for the most part think about it, are going away in the movie business, and they're going away in terms of entertainment because they are riskier movies to make. And I am not knocking studios at all because they have to be fiscally responsible, but the profits of making movies are dwindling. And It's twofold. They're dwindling. Attendance is dwindling, which is directly linked to the quality of movies. It's a very hard thing to put in terms of numbers, unfortunately. If they did, my job would be a lot easier to tell the people who pay anywhere between $1, $2, $3, and $300 million to make a movie. But people really love to go be moved. I mean, we live in a really difficult time. And one of the few releases that we all have is to be able to be entertained and be taken somewhere else. And if we continue to have people take, stuff, our product, and I'm going to be, and it is a product, but the product here is to make people think and feel. It's a widget. You can't get serious and be overly artistic about it, in my opinion. We are filling a niche, but that niche is to make people connect with their emotions. And it takes thousands of people to get from the beginning of an idea that where I work with people I work with may find an idea or a book or whatever it may be that we develop, and we think, just in the same way you read a book and it moves you, or you see a commercial and it moves you. These are things that we say, okay, we're going to take that movement experience and make it for 90 to 120 minutes. And one of my best memories, and is having entertainment with friends. I can make certain ones, like having entertainments with family, sharing entertainment with your children, and those moments are evaporating. And unless we do something about it, we're not going to be able to tell these stories. And it's really, it's hard, and it's what I think everybody needs to look at. And when you think about is, what you gained for movies, and what you're not going to gain when you're not going to see movies that are going to be the kind of movies that are enjoyable anymore. And I'm not going to start poking holes at movies that I don't think are as enjoyable as movies that I happen to be part of. But
We'll save that for the Q&A.
What? So that, we've got to respect it. We've got to give people the opportunity so that they can look back and have the enjoyable experience. One of the greatest joys for me is Forrest Gump really changed the way that we looked at each other, and changed and kind of made it was okay to be like a man who was not unintelligent. He just happened to look at the world a different way with a 70 IQ. And it was okay. And, I guarantee you that day that most people saw that movie, they didn't go and look at some guy and call him, a high school, bad name, or rather, a grade school bad name. And everybody was a little nicer to each other that day. And that's what we need right now. And I think we've all seen that enough. And so that's what I have to offer you.
And I can just give a couple of data points. So 6 out of 10 movies never make back their initial investment. On average, major motion picture, $100 million to make. Obviously, if we knew which were going to be the 4 that were going to be successful, we wouldn't make the other 6. These are risky ventures. But whether or not they succeed at the box office, when we're filming on location, $250,000 a day going to the local economy. So again, obviously, bad to steal, right? Bad to not reward those for their hard labor, but you're also hurting local communities, the 2 million people that go to work every day, the trade surplus, right? We are one of the fewer industries that have a positive trade surplus everywhere we deal. So a lot of, risky venture, a lot of money put into it, a lot of people working hard, and it used to be the secondary market was at least another place where you could get recoup some of those costs, right? You could go to a DVD, Blu-ray online, but this sort of stuff threatens that, and it makes it harder to invest money in quality movies.
Great. Tom, I want to bring you into the conversation here. I mean, you look at this a lot from the citizen perspective, the consumer perspective. Talk us through kind of how streaming media boxes are changing what consumers see, the impact on their access to technology, and even the threats that it raises for them.
Absolutely, and thank you for IGF for putting on this event. The problem isn't that they pose a risk to consumers. The It's that they're being lost in a blizzard of devices. So just to take a step back from this, we now live in a really interesting world where we have Alexa, and we have Nest, and we have entertainment boxes, and we have lots of things that are coming into our home, which means we know now there's going to be billions of devices that are interconnected on highways and everywhere else, and a lot of them are going to be smart, and when they're smart, that means they have data that potentially can compromise us. So our challenge is that within that, we're seeing a lot of these devices now coming into our home, and despite the best efforts of even the major brands on the things I just mentioned, there's efforts oftentimes successful to compromise those. So that's a never-ending battle. The challenge we face is then you have another set of boxes and apps and devices who do have one of two goals there. One, they either don't care. I don't want to disparage this box, but this box or one like it may not care, as Neil has pointed out. And then two, there's others who have a business model of not, they do care, but what they care about is finding a way to infect you. And the reason we know this is because we've done investigations, and I'll turn it over to Curtis in a second on that, who's in the middle of one, but in our previous work, we've done investigations that look at this on the dark web, and what you see is on the dark web is discussions, actually negotiations, between pirates and hackers on what will be the install rate price you'll pay. So in our research, we found 1 in 3 pirate websites expose consumers to malware, and you know what that malware does. You know, it can affect your bank account, it can affect your ID. In some instances, the camera that's on that computer that you're using right there, if it's been compromised, it'll actually be, people will be able to watch you. That's a particular issue when it comes to young women and young men in their rooms, where now hackers sell access to that, or they try to compromise and blackmail the person. That happened to Miss Teen USA, where she had her camera was used by someone, and they tried to blackmail her. Happily, she went to the FBI, and her hacker actually went to jail. But it tells you what can happen. It's why Mark Zuckerberg puts a piece of tape on his computer. Just FYI. I'll give you a piece of tape later. So our challenge that we face is, oh, you got one on there? Oh, fantastic. Nice to meet you, Mark. So our challenge is that how do we acknowledge this problem, look at it, and start to look at it holistically? We live now in a time of device security. So if we've got 1 billion devices and the weakest link compromises us, that's a challenge for us. We did some research and polling that showed that right now, 1 in 3 Americans say that if they were hacked, that would affect someone else. So it's not just about us anymore, it's about everyone else around us because we're all interdependent. Let me ask you a quick question. Raise your hand and keep it up if you could, if you've ever had your credit card information stolen. All right? Now raise your hand if you ever had, no, keep it up please. I know that's hard. Raise your hand if you've ever had your, you don't have to raise a second hand, your email hacked. Raise your hand if you've ever had your ID stolen. Well, look around the room. Keep your hands up just for a second. That's our challenge right now. Some of this comes with the territory of we live in a digital world and we're going to face risks. But the question we ask is, are you going to go down bad roads that you know have a risk of being robbed, beaten up, or whatever? We have to create some understanding of where the risks are and then try to mitigate those risks. So this box is part of a broader framework that deals with device security, but it has to start with acknowledging a lot of these people don't care about you. And actually they have a business model that's designed to take from you, and that's what we have to get to. So
yeah, Curtis, yeah, let me bring you in on this since you're obviously doing research on this. Can you kind of walk us through what you're seeing now in this space and some of the challenges?
Yeah, so we just started the research recently. What we do is we chase bad guys effectively on darknet and dark web. The likely places where we find them are markets like this, where there are unsanctioned transactions happening in media. We spend a lot of time in tertiary and secondary app stores, for instance, looking for threat actors looking to infect phone users. Recognizing that this market exists in the Cody and TikTok space, we started an investigation on the darknet to see if there was a market for malware being inserted into the unsanctioned streams to infect users. And like I said, we just began the investigation, but we did conclusively find a market where weaponized malware is being developed and sold around Cody streaming to be delivered through the Cody mechanism to end users. There's a lot of rabbit holes for us to go down here, a lot of threads for us to pull onto to further the investigation. We have a lot of tools and experience to do that. We're developing a report probably in the next couple of months. It'll be more comprehensive. But certainly, like I said, when there's a market like this, where a secondary market like this, where unsanctioned pirated activity is occurring, like even in the mobile app store space, it's a likely place for people to conduct business around malware insertion.
Yeah, Chris, maybe if I can just ask you to expand a little bit on one of the biggest cybersecurity threats we saw last year was, the rise of botnets and botnet attacks and distributed denial of service attacks that were now perpetrated by these botnets. But the key interesting finding of what happened last year is we've had these attacks before, but now they're happening from all these Internet of Things devices, right? And it was really when you looked at the actual devices that were involved in this, it was like the cheap routers and the cheap webcams from China. That seems like a very close parallel to what we're seeing with these devices. Can you talk about that risk and the challenges in that space?
Yeah, the original iteration of DDoS was infecting machines, traditional computers, and we've got an ecosystem to protect against that in place. Traditional network security, defense in depth, things like that. So it was already, by the time that model had been adopted, it was already partially mitigated by the tools we had in place, and we were quickly adapting. Of course, the bad guys adapt. So they've now targeted devices that aren't part of that security ecosystem, which means your television, your mobile phone, and toy boxes, for instance. And part of the stuff we did see when we were doing our research was around inserting botnet and DDoS capability into those devices through malware. They're selling the malware, there's a marketplace for it. So people who are trying to build botnets will buy this malware and weaponize it inside the Kodi streams.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's so interesting about that is just, all the policy that we have focused around addressing that problem of malware on a connected device. It's, under the assumption that it's, basically a trusted company that's selling the product. So, you can go to, Cisco and work with them, and they're going to fix their devices if there's any issues. And there's, obviously good feedback if they don't. You can't do that when you have one of these devices where, you're not really clear who's selling it or there's a disconnect with the malware.
Right, and one of the things that we picked up right away when we were doing the research, just trying to understand the marketplace a little bit, is we looked at the user forums and the communications from the manufacturers of these devices. And what was clear was most of them were taking it's not my problem stance. Like, look, I'm giving you this box. Whatever you do over this box is your own business. And sorry if you get infected, not our problem. So if their MO, toward their customers is, we're not responsible for your well-being. Like you said, that they don't care, like Tom said, they don't care about you. That fosters this underground market.
Yeah, Tom, do you have examples of this?
Yeah. So just to give one example that we were talking about. So you have a box like this, and you might have a foreign film, and it doesn't have subtitles. So what the hackers realized was they would put files in here because it's open source, so you're dropping files in, and the file for closed captioning actually included a virus. So it's an ingenious way for someone to go, well, I want to watch this film, it doesn't have closed captioning, so therefore I'll download this. And that was the avenue. So there's always a means by which to find a way to be able to reach the consumer in a way that's designed to do them harm. So that's just one example of how hackers are using these boxes and finding, I'd say, very creative and ingenious ways to figure a way to get into your system. Once you're in your system, that poses whole new issues. For example, Nest has had that trouble where their boxes have been compromised and now you're in the hackers in your network. That goes to this idea of broader device security, and when we let a less secure and perhaps less reputable device into our home, we're essentially opening a window that didn't exist beforehand.
This is the bait, right? If someone said, hey, I've got some malware, would you like it? No, thank you. But if someone says, I got a movie, this is the leading source now. The studies confirm it. I'm seeing studies now that's saying that video piracy is the leading source of malware on the home network. It used to be, click on an email. We've all sort of figured out what that is now, and we don't do that. Yeah. But now we've got 6.5 million households that have this in their house, connected to everything, as Tom's pointing out.
And in at least one instance, well, in our reports that we've done, you didn't even have to go to click on something on the website. So, for example, you didn't have to go to an ad, you didn't have to click on a movie. There are websites now dedicated to saying, watch this movie. The movie's not on there, but it's drive-by malware. The actual act of just visiting the website is what compromises you. So there's a lot of different ways in which they go about this. Wendy, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask you guys this question, because one thing that I think that perks my ears is also you keep on saying household. Household. Well, I know from my household, a number of people go onto my computer, my main computer, on my desk in my office, and, you know, my daughter will go onto it and she'll hack into her Gmail account. And my son will go onto it and he'll go into this. And, you know, we forget households are many people. And it becomes exponential, correct? That's the question?
Yeah, and your household, we may say household, but a mobile device will be connected to your network.
Yes.
So there's a means, there's a stream by which you get into the network and you go from there. Unfortunately, because we do a lot of research and sometimes I don't use the other phone that I'm supposed to do my research on, I've actually had 2 instances now where my iPhone's been hacked. Now, iPhones aren't supposed to be hacked, but I've had 2 instances in which I've had to happily figure out how to erase everything and then get it up on the cloud, and fortunately the virus hasn't followed me. But that's like I said, that's done my fault because I shouldn't be doing research on my primary phone.
No more piracy sites on your iPhone. Wendy, can I just get your reaction a little bit more to this? I mean, because one of the things that just kind of strikes me is, you talked a lot earlier about, the kind of emotions that people associate with movies, and that's, that's part of the motivation. And I would just think, it must be so troubling to hear about people using, all of that creative effort as an attack venue to go out and do this to people. You don't want them to watch your movie and the takeaway for them is, I had all my identity stolen.
It's really upsetting. I mean, one of the things that people don't really realize, as I said before, how much work goes into making a movie. How many jobs, how many people are employed, the trickle-down effect that was mentioned about the communities that had such positive economic growth from us going in there. But there's so much work that goes on into movies, and I think the real problem is letting people know how many people are employed, how much the livelihood of a movie continuing in life matters. There are guilds that which you could talk about more, that there are guilds that certain bottom lines, that they're health, welfare, insurance that are affected. They're infected, sorry. Affected. But they're infected, basically, both physically and mentally. Pardon? Oh, yes. Forrest Gump, I'm getting a little clues here. Forrest Gump took 10 years to get made before it got to the big screen. And ironically, most of these movies that are really good movies, they're like fine wines. They take a long time. My next film is a book called The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, based on by an author named Kate DiCamillo, who's a revered young adult author who did Winn-Dixie and Desperado. I don't know if any of you were familiar with either of those titles. That took, I think, by the time it gets to screen, 15 years. I mean, those are 15 years I've worked without getting paid. And not to say that I have not been compensated in other ways, but these are 15 years in believing in intellectual property that I think can be shared and have a positive experience for everyone who sees it and everyone who makes it. There's a wonderful, people will still come up to me that I've worked with, 20 years ago on a film, and there's a real camaraderie, there's a real synergy about when you work together in the business that I do. And it's unfortunate at times that people think about the film business, and that's why I like to say we're making widgets. It's not all glamorous. It's nice coming here to Washington and meeting all these people, but most of the work that I do to get these things made is not glamorous. It's work. It is work. It's constant work. For 15 years, you constantly are working and slaving away in different ways to get it made. And then physically, we physically make these movies still. Movies they think now are just kind of poof up from a cloud. They don't. There's labor that goes into movies. There's cable that's pulled into movies. Yes, is a lot of it computer-generated images? Sure, but people have to have the nuts and bolts to put those together. You have to do that when you film. You can't, can you make it all up on a laptop? You can make a lot of it up, but you still need the nuts and bolts to put there together. You still need the blue screens, and you need the people to go out and get the sounds, or you need to make the sounds. These are all technicians. These are, I'm a technician. They're all people who have little pieces that put it together that make it a wonderful, masterpiece, hopefully. And, and they inspire people. One of the other things that we've talked about is you want to make stories that inspire people that will go to work and want to go make these movies. We want to continue to be proud of the American movies that we make. And a lot of them, some of them have gone other places. They luckily are moving around the United States, wherever we get the best tax credits for them to be made. But you want to continue to see people say, I want to tell my story, because stories make a difference. And that's what...
That's not for you. Kevin, let me bring you in on this a little bit, just in terms of the trends that we're seeing in this space. So, I mean, we've, as I talked about at the beginning, I mean, the technology itself has changed so much. I mean, we saw, the piracy torrents, dropping from a high of 23% in 2011 of internet traffic to 5%. But of course, online piracy itself still seems to be growing. Can you talk about some of the trends you're seeing in this space, and is it how much is it being affected by the rise of these legal services versus just kind of more efforts to have more piracy in other spots?
Well, I think it's definitely attributable some to the rise in the legitimate streaming services. I mean, if you look at 2011, like the height of the torrent, illegal downloading website piracy, Netflix subscribers were around 20 million, and they're just starting to expand internationally. Today, they're at 120 million, and they're all over globally. Domestically, Hulu has gone from like a few hundred thousand in 2011 to 20 million. Amazon Prime membership has gone from 20 million subscribers in 2013, which is the earliest year I get data, up to 100 million. So that's a testament to like the incredible amount of content that's now available through these legitimate streaming services, and available affordably through these services. For somewhere around $30 a month, you now have access to the libraries of Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon, and that's just an incredible amount of content. I think that it also sort of has to do maybe with the younger generation that was in high school and in college, and they were illegally downloading. They're sort of coming of age now, maybe they can afford that $20, $30 a month for streaming services. But all that said, it's also attributable to the fact that the decline in torrent-based piracy is because we're just consuming content differently, and therefore pirating content differently. Like, the reality is that torrent sites and illegal downloading, they're just becoming obsolete in a cloud-based, on-demand streaming digital environment. Like, if you just look at the music industry, for example, how many people are illegally downloading an album onto a device now? Like, it's almost unheard of. You just go straight to a streaming platform, YouTube or whatever, and you listen to the song. Whether that's licensed properly or not, oftentimes it's not. But it's the same thing with music and television. Unless you want to watch the movie or a television show offline on a plane or something, you're very rarely downloading it. You're almost always streaming. And so that's sort of that shift that yes, it's nice that these legitimate streaming services exist now, but we have to look at just the shift to streaming and the shift to streaming piracy.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about, some of that shift, I think, has also kind of changed consumer perception. So, I mean, as you know, I mean, it used to be that, maybe it was a younger generation, people who were kind of around their computer all day, who might, be watching the online streaming. And now it's become, you do streaming to your TV, it's very mainstream. And so I think what's interesting is, it's very hard for the average consumer, I think, to look at the Fire Stick, the Amazon offer, the Apple TV, and then look at, something like this and say, oh yeah, that one's legal and perfectly okay, and this one's illegal, because they look very similar. And so I think, a lot of people now, there's all these legitimate services, and people learn to use them. They got accustomed to them. And now, the piracy is right there. And so how is that affecting some of this?
I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, a lot of people don't know what's legitimate and what's not. And that's why I think educating people is almost as important. So, for instance, in the United Kingdom, they've been dealing with these streaming boxes for a couple of years now, pretty proactively, the Cody box, if you will. And they've initiated, these campaigns to really educate the public about what these are, how they're dangerous, not only to the creative industries and how they hurt the creative industries, but these things can be actually physically dangerous. Like, I was reading that, like, some of these that are coming from China, like, have shot people, like, electrically, like, are injured by using it. And so I think that's a huge part of it, to let people know, what out there is legitimate service and what's not. But also, in working with retailers too, people that are selling these boxes on eBay, that was a huge campaign in the UK to stop the sale of these things on eBay and in brick and mortar stores actually. But trying to work with retailers to say, these are the names you should be looking for, whether you're a tick box, Cody box. And there's so much out there now that can be difficult, but I think you really have to start educating people on that.
Yeah, Neil, maybe I can ask you to respond to this as well. I mean, one of the things that strikes me when kind of following this debate is you have groups like EFF, Electronic Frontiers Foundation. I mean, they call this just cord cutting. They lump it in the same category as all this kind of legitimate activity. Can you kind of give me your reaction to that?
It's theft. This is theft. Cord cutting would be using Netflix and Amazon, not using a pirate service. And thankfully, I mean, so far, knock on wood, we don't see a lot of people defending these businesses. But to pick up on the point earlier, the real helpful part now is a lot of voluntary initiatives. And the great thing about the internet, it's a distributed network. It means anybody can be involved in that ecosystem. And in fact, the way we interact with the internet, we do have lots of intermediaries we work with. And so what's really helpful is when we work with the eBays, and we talk to them and say, people are modifying these boxes, and then they're offering them on your platform. If we can flag for you the indicators that this is a pirate box, will you take down people that are posting the sale of these boxes? And they will. Sometimes there are ad services around these, if not from the service itself, on the website where you download the app, or the wholesaler, the people that are doing these in bulk and selling them, will go to a website and download them. We work with advertisers to make sure the advertisers are not putting legitimate ads inadvertently, but legitimate ads on these websites is another source of revenue. We work with the credit card companies, right? These people are in this for money, right? They're not doing it just for the heck of it. And so when you buy these things, it's easier for them to say, well, give me your credit card number. But if the credit card companies won't let you use your credit card, right, voluntarily, we say these are bad actors and they do their due diligence. These are all roadblocks that sort of interrupt the ecosystem. So it's those sorts of activities that make clear this is really nefarious stuff. And thankfully, I haven't seen a lot of people, other than perhaps the people that are getting caught, the tick boxes of the world, saying, oh, this is perfectly legitimate. Thankfully, so far, no one is really saying this is lawful. We just need to make sure that people acknowledge that they're lawful, don't use them, and work together to stop them from proliferating.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that some certain organizations like the EFF are trying to take advantage of the frustration that people have with cable companies. I'm sure we've all been frustrated with cable box or not having access to all the channels we want. But they're grasping onto that frustration in an attempt to work on this idea that switch switching to something like that is the way of the future and a legitimate way to, whatever, stick it to your cable company. And that's a pretty dangerous idea because they totally neglect, the amount that it takes creators to come up with this content. And the fact that it'll happen in creative industries if, they just completely,
They're the ones who suffer, ironically.
Yeah.
At the end, people, be careful what you wish for, because they're not going to be able to pay for anything.
And that's why I start with those initial stats I start with. If your argument is we need more convenient access online to content, you should be stopping this so that those 140 lawful services thrive. And there can be more, right? That's the great thing, is you have more and more outlets for people to gain access to content how and where they want. But each time you do this, you jeopardize those legitimate businesses. So I don't buy the argument, well, it's clunky, so we have to steal, or EFF saying we have to make this market work better. No, the market is working. It would work better if we didn't have this, if we didn't have people rationalizing why this is okay, because then the legitimate businesses thrive and we all benefit.
So I want to talk about some of the kind of legal and policy responses and things the industry is doing in this space a little bit more. Maybe, Kevin, maybe you can comment. Neil started talking about the lawsuit, for example, against TickBox and also DragonBox. Lawsuits have been used in the past, obviously, some more successfully than others. As you're looking at it as an outsider, can you kind of walk us through what you're seeing in this case and the impact there?
Yeah, so the TikTok's case, I think, they were really using this blatant language of inducement. So in a way, they were easier to target than some maybe devices that aren't saying use this device to see movies that are still in the theater. Like, that's pretty obviously, illegitimate service. It's delivering movies straight to your television. But
Kevin, can I get you a little closer to the mic?
yeah. I think it's with these devices, it gets difficult because of the add-ons. They're oftentimes, these add-ons are developed overseas. They're difficult to identify, but if you can't go over, put you out of the box in the TikTok case, then you sort of have to try to go up the content tree, if you will, and find the people that are actually delivering these massive amounts of pirated materials to the boxes. And so there has been recently, I was reading the Alliance for Creativity and Entertainment has started to identify some of these developers and hit them with cease and desist letters, some in Canada and elsewhere. And whether that'll be effective is sort of, you have to wait and see, because like with torrent piracy, the second you shut down one of these developers, another one's going to pop up. It's the same whack-a-mole problem that you see with torrent sites. And so while it's encouraging that we're now sort of identifying some people that are developing these apps, I'm hesitant to say that it's just not going to be the same whack-a-mole problem again.
Yeah, and Curtis, maybe you can jump in here too and talk about some of the research, because I think one of the challenges is, as you talk about, some of this is on the dark web, some of this is just kind of it's hard to get to for law enforcement, oftentimes just simply because it's overseas, as Kevin said. So what are you seeing in this space? Can you kind of also maybe tell the audience that isn't familiar with this exactly what the dark web is and what this means?
Sure. So you've heard the terms dark web, darknet pretty frequently, and if you watch TV shows, I think they become pretty sexy terms for places where the bad guys are looking at hanging out. It's a pretty simple ecosystem. I'll lump them together. Darknet, dark web are places that you cannot get to with a normal software browser. You have to have special tools to get to them. They're a separate network, if you will, from the internet, very similar. And it fosters a tremendous amount of anonymity. So there are good things about that for activists, things like that, who want to whistleblowers, things like that. But like any technology, it can also be used for people. And a lot of the underground transactions. So our day job at GroupSense is monitoring marketplaces for surface data that's stolen or leaked from enterprise customers. So corporation. They're not doing it, it used to be when I was a kid, the motivation was, pride. But now it's money, right? So they're looking for assets, intellectual property, data that is valuable to someone else and sell and monetize it. And that all happens in this dark web. Like I said, we're starting the research. There certainly is more than scope. We're going to find a tremendous amount of material, I'm sure. But I did want to make a comment around, the apps that you were talking about, the content providers, and the risks that are employed on the end user. It's like the iPhone ecosystem. There's a reason why Tom said, iPhones don't typically get hacked is because Apple takes responsibility for the security of the apps that you download from each of those providers. When you jailbreak a phone and you start downloading from secondary or tertiary stores, all of that protection is lost. And so that goes back to your comment about education. I don't know if people understand when they do this, what they're signing up for. And who's providing this content. It's not protected. That's my main comment.
And that's why it's important to have responsible partners, right? So I mentioned eBay. Amazon is great, too. We work with Amazon. If, you see on an online store something going a little awry, we work with legitimate platforms. Policymakers have been helpful. I know I saw Congressman Deutsch, I don't know if he's still here, who understand this and who advocate both sides of the aisle. This is not a partisan issue. This is about compensating those for their hard work, generating great content for audiences, and helping our economy. I mean, the movie business is an iconic American industry. It's good for our sort of diplomacy abroad. It's good for our economy. It's good for our citizens. And it's great to have great content.
And one of the things, I'll just interrupt for 1 second, is that I find that one of the other problems is I seem to have all these esoteric problems, but one of the other problems is really teaching the next generation that that you do have to pay for this. I'm not, in some ways I don't blame them because that's just how they were raised and that's how they know no other way.
They don't culturally recognize
Yes,
stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
They don't realize that, it's one of, I go around and I ask all my teenage family and my son's friends, and they'll be like, well, I said, do you realize, well, I thought I was doing something bad, but then it kept on, they don't get caught. They keep on going. There's no ramifications for it. Yeah. So, you don't really have any conscience about behavior that no one is mandating that is not right.
If I could just add to that, with the shift to streaming, now, I think when you downloaded something in the past off a torrent site, there was a mindset of, like, you had that copy on your device, and it was almost like evidence, like you knew you had done something wrong because you see it the next day. When you stream something, you stream it, you finish watching it, it's done, that's it, it's gone. And so I think that sort of plays with the mindset of the people pirating these things anymore. It's like, well, I didn't really steal it, it's gone now.
20 minutes.
Yeah, you wake up the next day, it's not on your computer anywhere, so you sort of justify it to yourself.
And obviously we want the consumer to understand so they don't do this. But the target, right, is the people making money. It's the criminal enterprise. There is a criminal enterprise here that is stealing content, has zero of the cost of producing this, right? They're not paying the $100 million on average to make the movie. They're just taking profit by stealing something with no overhead cost. That's really who we're going after, right? We need to make sure, and I mentioned this at the top, right? Thank DOJ, thank law enforcement for focusing on these IP issues, encourage them to keep doing it, help us fund them. We have civil suits, and again, we have great partners in Netflix and Amazon and others, a whole ecosystem of people that realize we need to stop this. And voluntary initiatives, working with other people in the online ecosystem. We all benefit by cleaning up our neighborhood, right? We always talk about the neighborhood watch. We want to have a clean neighborhood in the brick and mortar world. You want a clean neighborhood online as well.
Could I just jump in on that for a second? So you asked a question, what should we do about it? We can talk about that. I think an element of this is awareness and transparency. Curtis lives in the dark world, and
I have lights.
at night. And think about 30, 40 years ago, organized crime, so the mafia. They dealt in the shadows, and they created risk for people, and there was a tax, essentially. So there was costs, financial costs. And when we finally actually, the RICO Act, and I won't go through all that, but when we finally actually zeroed in and began to put a real focus on that, it allowed people to understand it, and frankly, in some instances, a lot of people in distance from that. I don't know if everyone remembers the Frank Perdue, but he was essentially running into challenges with that. It made it socially unacceptable to do so because we put attention on that. I think there's an opportunity with what goes on the dark web and everything else, and also as we create awareness for consumers to have that happen, but then also put a focus on the companies that help facilitate this. And not to pick on Google for a second, but if you have your phone and you're on Google, and if you want to do this right now, I'll prove it to you, just go on Google search and type watch B, just the letter B. And the first search result that'll come back will be watch Black Panther online. So to the extent that we have well-known reputable companies engaging in things that help facilitate that, and by the way, when you go to those sites, and we're about to prove this with a report, then you'll see that you get about 8 results, about 5 will be pirate websites, and 2 or 3 of those will infect your computer. So you're essentially 2 clicks away from malware from a simple search for something that might have been just watch anything. It just starts with 1 letter. So I think the more we just put a focus on this from a transparency standpoint, how the dark web works, who operates there, what are we doing from a corporate social responsibility standpoint, and what are we doing as citizens in creating awareness about the risk there, I think that's where we start, because short of that, it's in isolation, and isolation doesn't work.
Well, let me ask about the DMCA, because, obviously with online streaming, you have these DMCA takedowns. And so that's, we can argue about the effectiveness of it, but at least that is a mechanism that exists, for many of those types of things. So when you go on Google and you type, watch Forrest Gump, by now, people have gotten around to doing the DMCA takedowns, because that was what, 1994, right, or 6. So, but Black Panther, they haven't gotten to it yet. But my question is really about, as we move into streaming media boxes, that same takedown doesn't really exist, because you can't send a DMCA takedown to, the app that's running on the tick box, which you don't even know who that is.
Not only that, we had a problem with drunken driving in this country, maybe we still do, but it's less. And part of that was we created roadblocks, and we had police being extra vigilant about that. But that's not what stopped it. What stopped it is I have a 21-year-old son, and if he's getting in a car after a night out and not getting an Uber, his friends think he's a jerk. So it was a social change that occurred that is doing that, and that's what I'm kind of getting at. I'm not saying anything against DMCA. All I'm getting at is there's something bigger and broader here that gets to behavior and what's considered both acceptable behavior and actually potential risk to those behaviors that are fundamental to this. So I'll let other people answer the DMCA, but my biggest focus is on consumer awareness, so that's where I come in from that standpoint.
No, that's right. I mean, it is making people socially conscious that, you can't have all the excitement of movie stars and, magazines and all the businesses that will be driven and all of the good and bad stuff they put us through and not have consequences. You really, and I think that example, it's the way you change people, and you also make people responsible. I'm going off my end, but you know what? If you serve an underage kid liquor and something bad happens, and they see it happen to somebody else, they're not going to do it themselves, and so I think we need to start making them aware, take ownership.
Yeah, Kevin, I want to just ask maybe one last question I want to open up to the audience. USTR has cited illicit streaming devices in both its 2017 301 report and its notorious market reports as illegal processes that are contributing to high piracy rates in countries around the world. So is there anything that USTR specifically can do, or even just a little more broadly, in government related to combating piracy abroad on these devices? Because one of the things I think we haven't hit on as much in the conversation is how much this is happening globally, but it's impacting U.S. businesses.
Yeah, I think, so again, it's education and enforcement. And I think it's working with, on the enforcement side, working with the creative industries like the MPAA, who have provided the USTR with a lot of these, the names of these add-on developers. So working together, the government and the creative industries to target really the source of all this pirated material. Because, like I said, sometimes it can be difficult to pin down the device maker if he's able to operate in these gray areas of copyright law. So you really, to go after these add-ons, and it can be tough because they can be overseas, but to target them, hit them with the cease and desist, and really try to shut down the source, because if the source is always there and exists, then everything else will adapt around that to deliver it to you. So hitting the add-on developers is going to be really one of the most important ways to snuff out the streaming piracy.
Great, thanks. All right, I want to open it up to any questions from the audience. If you can just give your name and any affiliation. Please.
So Michael. Okay, I was waiting for Mike. Yeah, my name is Jean-François Wada. I have two quick comments and a question. Comment on the what it makes to make a movie, what it takes. There's a great movie by François Truffaut, Night by Day, that is a perfect illustration of that. To Nîmes, if you can convey the message to some people in town about the need not to look at sectoral reciprocity, since you have this big trade surplus, that would be a great idea. I wish you could govern that. My question really is, I work with a group in France called Cultural Coalition, and they do have exactly the same problems that you do. They want to protect their work, their creation, the emotions they give to the people from the same type of mechanism that is being used all over Europe. So how is it possible to work together to convey the message that people should care and shouldn't steal?
So we are all coalitions and coalitions and coalitions. Give us the contact info. We're happy to reach out. The MPA has offices all over the globe, and we are happy to work in concert. My colleagues in Europe, in Asia, Latin America are all happy to work together, share information, share data, talk to policymakers, explain the arguments that work. And right, the problem, right, the internet is interconnected. It is not, there's no one place on the internet, and so one copy of a content anywhere on the internet is ending up to be multiple copies everywhere on the internet. So we all have to work together, because eventually, no matter where it starts, it's going to come, right, consumers are going to find it everywhere.
I would just add to that, as trade agreements are negotiated, and there's obvious bad actors out there where a lot of these devices are coming from, we have to put the pressure on them to protect the intellectual property laws of the other countries that they're going to be in these agreements with.
Other questions? Yes.
Do you want to start?
I don't have the number.
No.
It's not good.
So there are millions and millions of takedown notices. It reflects, it reflects the problem of piracy. What the DMCA gets right is it creates a framework. It creates a framework where everyone in the ecosystem is to work together. That really is the answer, right? Just like no one entity controls the internet, no one entity can solve a problem on the internet. That's what the DMCA was about, that the technology companies, the content companies, all the parties in the ecosystem work together to keep their part of the internet clean. We just need to keep doing it. And I think, as Tom points out, it requires a change in culture. The piracy changes with the technology. The DMCA is not meant to be technology specific. It just says we work together to solve these problems. We need to work together better. I think it's now 6 out of every 10 piracy efforts are now streaming, right? It's not BitTorrent anymore. That doesn't mean that's not the quantity of piracy, but the piracy of choice was BitTorrent. Now 6 out of 10 people are doing it through streaming, and we just need to work together on the different technology mechanisms, but it's the same problem.
Yes.
Greg Sacker, Safety Association. Wendy, I was just hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the challenges that you face in the creative process. think when you touched on the fact that it can take 10, 15 years and there are all of these hurdles to overcome before an idea becomes a film or a TV show, it's something that most of us, particularly on the Hill, don't hear when we're talking about policies around copyright or the creative industry. So perhaps you just elaborate a little bit more on some of the challenges you face.
No, well, basically, times change, movies change, audiences change, tastes change, but at the end of the day, for example, you start with Forrest Gump. It was a book. I got it in the form of The Galley, which is an unpublished manuscript that was intended to be published by Doubleday at the time. And it was part of Simon Schuster. But, so we get the book. 1984, 85. We get the book. That long ago. Wait, is it that long ago? Yeah. Yes. 1985. And we get the book, we read the book, we meet the author. The author made a go at the screenplay, Winston Groom, who some of you may or may not know. He's really, for the most part now, a historian, a very well-respected historian. And he does a couple drafts on the book. We get the script, we get the script back. The script's like, oh, and then you gotta edit the script, and, you know, there's certain things. The first line of the book is, "Being an idiot ain't no box of chocolates." And then it continues with his journey. That is the first line of the book. And he's got a whole bunch of things in the story that are relevant to the times of the 80s and 90s. So we make a couple drafts, we get a couple more writers. We had, everyone from, if you're interested, Ernest Thompson, who wrote on Golden Pond. We had, multiple writers. We had multiple directors. We had Ivan Reitman, who was known for the Beethoven fame, because Beethoven was in fashion then. We had John Candy, who wanted to be Forrest Gump, because Forrest Gump, as originally written, was a 6'5", 270-pound man. So we go through many different, we went through 8 years of a script until we went to Tom Hanks, and I had been working on another project. And not in our favor, they chose to go with another actor, Kevin Costner. Anyhow, on this other project, it was called The Postman, which became a debacle. Needless to say, we were very happy that our team was not the one who proceeded with that, and we proceeded instead on developing Forrest Gump. And the way that movies also work is they can jump around between studios. So it was originally at Warner Brothers, then it went to Paramount. A new regime comes in. So some things are basically, we make some choices in terms of development and where we go. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. Sometimes, unfortunately, true life things happen that may be too similar or dissimilar from the story. But then there's also things that happen which happen in all businesses. There is a change in the administration. And the company, the group of people who are making the movie and said they wanted to make it at one studio are terminated. And there's a new group that comes in, and they don't basically want to touch anything that has to do with the previous administration. So we have to go to another government. And basically these are things, some of them, as I said earlier, are in our control, some of them are not. So I think the percentage of movies that probably good scripts that get to film are probably 5%. That's good scripts, legitimate good scripts, let alone the one that every Tom, Dick, and Harry has written. So movies take so much of the effort is not even in our control. It's just life. And ultimately, when you get that movie, then you have to, we all nickel and dime, we all have budgets. Once again, I'll say, everyone doesn't think the movie business does. We do. And we budget a movie, we break it down the way that you would break down anything in the world, whether it's building a bridge, a tunnel, manning a troop. We break it down, and usually it costs more money than they want to give us. So then we have to go figure out another way to make it. And luckily, that's a creative area that we can nip and tuck the creative storytelling, usually to adapt, and it's called cutting. So all of you know it when you've seen a film that all of a sudden you're in the next scene, you don't know why you're there. Basically, it's probably because they didn't have the money to do the connective tissues, or the connective tissues didn't make sense and they were cut. The process is very labor-intensive intellectually, in addition to physically, as I referred to before. And those are things that people don't, in general, you see these movies, people don't give up on the good ones. They're the hardest. What's your question?
Explain to them what a day looks like on the set.
So when we start on set, usually you have a call, and the calls will be, say, for example, 5 o'clock in the morning, trucks roll in. And this is where local economies benefit. These trucks roll in, these big white, for the most part, Hadid trucks roll in, and a camp is set up. So usually we have a camp because we're housing and feeding and home and taking care of usually a couple hundred people. And that includes the people who are the electrical people who supply the electricity. That will be the electricity both for what we're filming on set and the electricity to run the behind the scenes. So that electricity may be for the wardrobe trailer to wash the clothes from yesterday's extras so we can put them back in today's extras. Extras are the background people. So we have usually a base camp, which is often a local church, a local school, somewhere where we can really take over, usually a pretty huge parking lot is most often the case, or a big city square block. And then we have our location, that's the base camp, then we have our actual location where you film. And usually there'll probably be around 50 people on a set, that's called a set. So we go there and we film. By the time the actors show up, that's usually about 5:15, 5:30, once the trucks are opened up. And if you guys all just saw the Academy Awards, you saw there are people like Gary Oldman, who was Winston Churchill, who took him 3 hours to get ready.
Or The Shape of Water creature was even longer.
Yeah, right. Now, by the way, it's not fun sitting there and having your makeup put on.
I'm sure it's not.
It's really not fun. But there's many people who have to show up to put on his face, put on his hair. It just can't be done the way you're running in and taking a shower and showing up. And then there are many people that have to pull the cable from that electricity that was actually at the base camp. You have to drive another generator, because that's why we have a lot of people driving around, to provide the electricity for the set. Once you get that up, then you have to have the lighting for the set, because often our days are very long, because they have to be, because we film usually probably 12-hour days. And often we will go from what's morning into night, and the night may still have to look like day. And then we wrap it all up after we've filmed all the different scenes that are assigned for that day, and we wrap it all up, and we'll go to a new place tomorrow.
We start at 5 and you end at 5.
We start at 5, we'll usually say end at 7. And when we end at 7, that's not done for all of the people. As I did say, a lot of those people will be taking that equipment to either the place that we're going to tomorrow, or they will be closing it up. So those people, usually the Teamsters are first in, last out. Their day can be up, we now have rules of how long most people can work, but probably 16-hour days, they can be. 17-hour days. Sometimes we have shifts, they could be 18, 19, 20-hour days, but that may involve a couple shifts of people doing it. And my day doesn't end when they yell wrap. Luckily, I do get to leave and not have to put back everything that we took out, but the day continues. Usually, we go and look at what the footage was from the day before or the day before that. Now we do stream legally our footage through a number of different sites, but often we want to watch that footage with the group of the creative talent. So that will mean, like, I'll go with the director and we'll watch the dailies together. And we do that for two reasons. We want to make sure that there's continuity in the look of the movie. We want to make sure that we're getting everything that we want. And we want to really kind of be comfortable in what we know that we need to prepare for and what we haven't gotten the day before.
Thanks. I think we had one more question in the back I wanted to make sure we get to before we run out of time. Yeah.
John Lewinsky, you talked a little bit about social change. Does some of that change need to come from the industry itself? Because I think on the consumer side, we don't hear the stories of the people who make films, the number of people, the number of hours. But I just did some quick Google searches, and what's easy to find is budget and box office. And so the focus is on money. And when an 18-year-old has an opportunity to buy a box for $20, and they see a big movie that has a small budget but made a lot of money, they think, hey, that's just there.
Yeah, and that's why we do events like these, and I think you'll see the MPAA and lots of other organizations are trying to emphasize that, to emphasize the creative side, to emphasize the number of people that are working on these projects, to emphasize, as Wendy mentioned, that the people behind the camera are also dependent on these businesses.
Employers.
They're hourly employers. And Wendy mentioned their health care, their retirement comes not just from the box office, but also from the online distribution, the lawful online distribution. We are trying to hit all those messages. As you heard from Wendy's description, these are difficult things to make, and there should be two takeaways. One, the people that put in that effort need to be compensated, and we need to be able to continue to make those so that they can do that again tomorrow, right? These are what we call gig economies. This group of people comes together for that project, and they pick up and they do another one. Right? They don't work for the studio, they work project to project. The studio is financing it, and that's the other takeaway. These things, as you heard, are very difficult to make. They're expensive to make. There is a lot of risk, and it's the same thing, that was movies, it's the same thing with TV. It's a rule of thumb, it's not a literal rule, but it's the 80-80-80 rule. 80% of scripts never become a pilot, 80% of pilots never become a show, 80% of shows never see that second season. What helps get those things greenlit is to lower the risk, because you know you have a secondary market from a legitimate online service. And we are increasing, and we've been talking about doom and gloom, the number of movies and television shows are growing because of the outlets, because of the internet gives us an ability to reach more and more people. More than 400 scripted original television shows a year now. Tremendous. But what makes it easier to greenlight those things is you know that legitimate ecosystem is going to be protected. And when it's not, it means fewer things are greenlit, you get less content, and the people that are working to create these things have less opportunity.
Thanks. So I think we're pretty much at time. I just want to ask for just kind of a last, we're obviously here at Congress. What's your main message to either Congress or the administration in short attention spans? So let's say Twitter length, but the new Twitter length, so 280, not 140 characters. What's your main? I know some people came in late too. What's your main takeaway? And why don't we start with Tom and then we'll go down. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, start with me. I think there's a leadership opportunity from an administration, from a policymaker standpoint, to one, shine a light. Two, there's initiatives that could take place. For example, you could create a clearinghouse. By the way, it's not just piracy, it's things on Etsy, it's counterfeits and all these things. There's bad actors. I go back to the mob. Until 1970, before RICO, and this is the long Twitter feed of more characters, we didn't organize law enforcement against them because it was all state. When we made it federal and you suddenly had RICO, you could actually approach them in a different way. I think there has to be that approach, that one, looks at enforcement that way, and two, looks at how you might be able to create a clearinghouse of bad actors that you could share information, much like the casinos do with people who try to cheat casinos.
Yeah, Neil.
I mentioned earlier, encourage law enforcement to continue to do the job they do on IP. Please fund them. Put in lots of language in your report saying, please continue to do this. This is an important part of our economy, important part of our culture. We have great policymakers. I mentioned Ted Deutsch earlier. We have the Creative Rights Caucuses led by Doug Collins and Judy Chu. Everyone needs to recognize that in every community throughout the country we film. This is a local issue for everyone's constituents. It's good business, it's good jobs, it's a great industry, right? We all love the movies, we all love TV. We just need to understand the importance of the industry and recognize that theft is theft, and encourage law enforcement and fund law enforcement to continue to work on IP theft.
Thanks, Wendy.
My takeaway would be that you don't get anything really good for free. You know, you want to laugh, you want to cry, you want to enjoy your time, you know, you pay to go on a ride, so pay to see a movie, you know, pay to see your TV shows. Otherwise, you're not going to be entertained.
Thanks.
I'll say an emphasis on the 3 E's, which are enforcement, education, and the continued effort, sorry, cheated there a little bit, by creative industries to keep delivering comprehensive and affordable content.
Thank you.
And your earlier point about trade agreements raising the standards
There you go.
Globally are very important.
I think one of the keys to curbing cybersecurity and cyber theft is consequences. So I'd like to see more focus on attribution and sharing across geographic boundaries. You know, we commonly find threat actors that are operating in free and open environments in foreign countries that we, you know, in most cases, if we had the cooperation from those countries, we could go get them tomorrow. So the cooperation around that and a focus on attribution.
Great. I really want to say that's a wrap, but I won't. Anyway, thank you all for being here today and being part of this conversation. I think it's really important that we continue to focus on this issue, so thank you for joining us, and thanks to everyone for being here today.